So we have our scene from before, and this is just a stick emitting the particles. This again has no special shader on, just the grey ones. And just as before, we created. If we look at this, we have just a scene material on here. So just like before, we can create a new ice particle volume. Now I could just make a new material. Let's do this one. Again, it makes my life easier. And just going to hit refresh here, and we can see that one on there. If we render this one out, we're going to notice a difference. We see almost nothing. And I'm going to explain this, why this happens. We're going to bring our example one. So I'm just going to delete these two nodes and find my shader compound flame and just hook this one in. And this is going to be an important thing to know about particles, and I've seen this happen several times, and our beautiful flame we created earlier has turned as nothing more than a couple of yellow splodges. Why is this? Well, there's several reasons this is happening. The main reason I found is scale. The other reason is number of particles. So let's start by increasing the number of particles. This emitter is only emitting 1,000 particles, and there's not that many there because it's emitting 1,000 particles over the entire stick surface and removing most of them. So let's go up to 5,000. We'll hit play, let's hit refresh a few frames. Just let it go for a second. You'll see it's going a lot slower with this many particles, and that's because we have our closest surface or closest neighbor's force, and that's a pretty slow processor intensive force, and you may want to adjust that when you have more particles to reduce the cutoff. But this should be enough just to give us an example of what's going on. So we'll just stop here and render it again. And now we see a bit more, but still we're not getting that denseness we had before. We could work with density inside our compound. Now this compound I didn't give any output, so we'll actually open it up to change things, and we'll just increase the density and see if that makes a big difference. Go all the way to 150, and it's still got this weird kind of broken up look. Under volume rendering, it's using default settings. We could go to high settings to increase the rendering quality, and that makes it look a little better, but still pretty broken, and it's not giving us the look we had before, and we have a ton of particles going on here. So how can we make this look better and work better without having some crazy slow rendering times and very large numbers? We have to remember volume shaders are world scale based, so the size of a particle is how much density they have, and since these are very small particles, everything is coming out pretty small. So the easiest way for me to affect this is actually take my stick and scale it. So we're just going to take this, go to scale. I'm just going to scale it by about 10 times. And I find this often helps a lot when you're dealing with shader problems, is actually scaling up your object a bit. My tiny little null is right in the middle there somewhere. There it is. Just going to move that null back to a place where it can, and I'm going to scale the null as well. Let me hit play. Now you can really see how small those particles were. They're actually pretty tiny. So the next thing is to make the particles bigger. We can do that. We have our burn emit, and we have our base value for particles. We'll make that maybe 5. See how that works. And that looks like a pretty good base size, but now they don't seem to be going very far. And that's again because everything's larger, so the force needs to be increased. So bring the force, direction force up to about 1. And you'll have to tweak values because when you have different scale, these simulations, of course, work differently. And we can now see that's pretty good. We probably need to tweak the particle size more, and let's just go here and go up to 7 for the base value, so we're not getting way too small at the end here. And that's pretty good. So just by scaling everything up a bit, let's see how the particles now look. We're getting a lot more density in here. They're still, a little bit too small, and our density is actually too much on the particles. So we're going to go back and change that a little bit more. But first of all, we're going to tweak these particles and size and everything else to make everything look better and keep everything together as well more. And that looks pretty good volume wise. See how things look. And of course I'm going to tweak my density next and start working on the particle shader. So you can very quickly see that tweaking these makes a big difference. So we will tweak this a bit more, and I'm just going to go to open up my shader as well, get the render tree open, so we can start working on this at the same time as we are tweaking the different numbers. Oops, I had to re-simulate that. Get the particles out. So you can see here quite quickly its number of particles and the size of the particles affect how the volume shader looks. That's important to know. So I pump my volume up pretty high. We can see it's almost solid here with the density here set to 150. So I'm bringing this back down to 50, and it should look quite a lot better. So after a little bit of tweaking, I tweaked here the global density a bit, also adjusted the elliptical shape slightly. We're starting to get a better look here. The last thing we need to do is start adjusting the gradient and start especially working with some of the fall-offs and how everything ends out. So let's just bring some of these transparencies down and just tweaking the colors and transparencies until we get exactly what we want. So I'm making things a bit more transparent at the bottom here, so we don't see quite as many of the particles, and even from shifting these lines up a bit, you're going to find that everything will work better. So you'll be able to tweak this and keep working with it, looking at your reference until you eventually get results you want, and you'll be tweaking your gradient colors, your gradient alpha, and you'll be tweaking in the particle renderer. Of course, you've got your density, your global density is an important one, elliptical shape, metaball-like shape. You can tweak the volume color, of course, is controlled here, the tint, if you need to tint it. And on the volume rendering is where you can change the settings. I'm going to go default settings, just a slightly faster render because it'll be a little bit quicker than the higher settings. You can go to low settings if you want to render stuff very quickly, and you'll get some graininess when that happens. And it's all based on your cell size as well. So have some fun with this. Again, tweak the values, tweak the numbers, tweak the gradient, and you just keep working until you get roughly the result you want. And you can spend, again, a lot of time working with these and tweaking them. You may also find a little bit of the density as well using this cloud density. You can also add some better edges to your particle system, and you'll see here it gives me a bit more of the edges. So, and if it comes to it again, go back to the actual simulation and maybe create more particles. I did a final render I'll show you in a second, and that final render I believe had 10,000 particles as a rate, so you'll find you can get better results with even more particles. Just I wanted this to be a reasonable render time so you can actually watch it interactively. But I'll show you the final render in a second.